I'm really excited to be here today with James of Integral Intent. And I met James, I think, on Twitter. I mean, I think that's how I met you, which is a strange place to say you met somebody.
Yeah, I think it was on maybe YouTube, because I'm not on Twitter. Like, I have a Twitter, but I've never been able to like use that format for some reason. I've tried many times. So I think we kind of just in the same circles, and our
Maybe we
connection
have
emerged
a
through there.
comment
Yeah.
thread or something.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it says I tried to record here. It says, please ask the host to give you permission to record. I don't know if you see that there anywhere.
Well, it's not letting me. I don't understand why it's doing that. Let's see if it's in the security. Allow participant. You can do anything you want to.
Yeah. If not, it's not a big deal. You could just send me the
Yeah,
data
I think I'll
after.
have
Yeah.
to send you the video because
Yeah.
it's not allowing me to let you in for some
Yep.
reason.
No, yeah, not a problem at all. No worries.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, I met you by the comments in YouTube, and then I noticed that the last few weeks you've been doing some readings from the hierarchy of heaven and earth on your channel. And I have had reason to be involved in that because one of my viewers sent me this book last year and told me to read it and get interested in it. So I've tried plowing my way through it. It's a very, it's in a different mind space than I'm in. So for me, it's a very difficult book to grab hold of, but I've been working on it. And I thought it would be fun to talk with you because I had a talk with Richard Lang, who is the one who is kind of in control of the book and the other properties of Douglas Harding from his estate and all of that. And I felt like he didn't really want to talk about the ideas in the book. He just wanted to talk about this particular aspect of headlessness. And that's the part that I particularly didn't want to talk about because that's the thing that I just don't think that's the most interesting thing about the book. So I was excited to talk with you because it looked like you're actually interested in the book. And I think you're also interested in Jordan Peterson. Am I right?
Yes, definitely.
So we have some connections there. So I thought it would make a fruitful conversation. But before we get started, I would love to have you tell me a little bit about your background and how you grew up and then how you came to start a YouTube channel. I mean, what was your trajectory to get to that point?
Yeah, I grew up, so my parents were Greek immigrants. My mom was essentially pregnant with me when she moved over here in early 1980. So I was born and raised kind of in the Central Florida area. I ended up, going to school at university here in Florida, and that's where I found kind of just jumped to the intellectual trajectory, philosophy, and I started really through political theory, just finding political philosophy, and I really fell in love with it because I wasn't exposed to it at all before that. And it was just like, I just devoured as much as I could. I switched my major from, political science to a kind of a double philosophy, political science major. And it was just, for some reason, I've never found anything that was so interesting to me in my life. And things that were very, I guess, difficult to read or grasp just were very intuitive for me. So I just, got the degree in philosophy, and then I probably really read and appreciated philosophy more after I graduated, and just started really reading, continental philosophy, Martin Heidegger, Husserl, the phenomenologists, as well as kind of, all flavors, the existentialists, the French postmodernist. So I think that's what my interest in Peterson was, because I was really interested in postmodernism. I wasn't interested in kind of the sensational political aspects of it, but the critiques that it leveraged against corrupt institutions at all levels. That's something that kind of resonated with me. So I was really interested in that. And then, I'm still interested in it, and started the YouTube channel reading from some different philosophers. And, kind of the impetus of starting the channel was, it was coronavirus, right? And COVID-19. I was working from home, and I started reading the church fathers, started reading Christ, the Eternal Tao specifically, which is a book about Father Seraphim Rose and his life, and how I saw so many resonances with my own pathway through Taoism, through Eastern mystic traditions, and Buddhism and Zen. I really got heavily into Taoism, traditional Chinese medicine, practicing, reading, and doing, as we talked a little bit before, Qigong, which is a type of energy work, cultivation. And then through Peterson, I reoriented my gaze towards the Bible, with his lecture series. My family, for generations, all generations before me, were, really Greek Orthodox. There was no other option in Greece, right? I mean, that's just where kind of how things were. And then I was like, I really am the first generation to fall away from that religious tradition, and then re-looking at the scripture through these new eyes, and reading the church fathers, and getting into, from Jordan Peterson to Jonathan Pageau, which I'm kind of heavily involved in the symbolic world group, really just reintroduced me to the scriptures in a really beautiful way. So the YouTube channel was just me reading from different church fathers, different saints, different philosophers. And then from there, I started a podcast, the Rooster's Crow podcast, where I started engaging with people. I guess the idea is to engage with people, ideas, and culture that, like the Rooster's Crow from the scriptures, the story where Peter denied Christ 3 times before the rooster crowed, and it broke Peter's spirit. But at the same time, it gave him an opportunity for repentance, for like authentic repentance. So the rooster crow is this kind of alarm sound, right? This warning sound, but it also provides opportunities for metanoia, changes of heart. And I think that's where we're at in terms of historically, socially, and culturally. We're at this pivot point. So I was looking to speak with people that are tuning into what's happening, but aren't just alarming about it, are looking for pathways forward. That was kind of the impetus of it. And, met some very interesting people. I've had great conversations, and the way that I've been handling it is whatever arises after each discussion, I'm just going to follow my intuition and find the next person to talk to. And it's been wonderful. It's brought me in front of you, which is a great thing.
Well, that's almost exactly the same way that I have handled it from the beginning. It's just whatever comes up. It's like this thread that sort of leads you along.
Yeah, definitely.
And all these interesting things, and then something else interesting will pop up. And so what got you interested in the hierarchy of heaven and earth?
Well, I saw it on, I follow Paul Vanderklay, and I saw him talking about it, and he read the introduction, I think it's the introduction by C.S. Lewis. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And it really resonated with my current interests in this idea of the hierarchy. You see the critiques leveled by the postmodernists that hierarchy are in themselves corruption, are in themselves bad. This idea of hierarchy is absolutely necessary. It's the structure of reality. It's how the world lays itself out. And this idea of heaven and earth, and man being a mediator between heaven and earth, is something that I've been thinking about a lot. And talking with the symbolic world group, we're always talking about the different fractal levels of reality, right? So, you are at the same time a collection of individual cells, but those collections, that collection of individual cells makes up your unique body. So you have the unified multiplicity, right? And then I'm part of a family. So I'm an individual part of a family, but I'm also a whole family. That whole family is part of a neighborhood, which is part of a community, which is part of a nation. So this fractal level, this self-similar pattern that goes all the way up and down the hierarchy, made me start thinking of the idea of levels above our really perceptual awareness. And that brought in the whole idea of angels and disembodied spirits, so to speak, and how you can ontologically, metaphysically think about these things in different ways. And this book kind of just popped up at the right time, and I found it fascinating and interesting and compelling. And I saw your talk with Richard Lang, and I had the same way I went about it. I started reading from the end. So I started reading the headless part chapters first. I'm like, let me go to the end, because I saw the chapters on, I forgot what they were called. They were talking about the hierarchies of heaven, in a sense. And I read those, and I'm like, wow, these were a lot more kind of streamlined or easier to read. Mm-hmm. And it made it a lot easier to go back to the beginning and read the first few chapters, which are kind of difficult to get inside the logic But once you do, it's kind of, I kind of think of the idea of Heidegger's discussion or conception of being, which is hard to crack at first, but once you crack it, like makes sense within that logic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I often read books that way. I go to
Yeah. Yeah, why not?
drives my husband crazy because if we're
Yeah.
watching a movie and it just gets a little bit too tense for me, I'll have to stop, go back and read all the spoilers, find out how it ends, and then I can go back and I can watch the movie.
That's interesting. I like that. You kind of have instead of the emerging, like we were talking earlier, how an organism develops from the bottom up, right? So the DNA is coding for proteins to make an organism, but there's also this top down, more subtle way of things organizing themselves, right? So if you start at the end, right, you can have a different perspective on how organization kind of manifests itself. So I think that's interesting. I kind of agree with that.
Well, one of the things that Jordan Peterson talked about that really just grabbed me was this idea that the past can actually be completely rewritten by the present.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go along through a series of circumstances and have absolutely no clue as to why they're happening. You have no understanding of them at all. And you just keep moving on in life. And then maybe you go through a period of deep suffering or something. And when you come out of that, all of a sudden you understand what all that other stuff was before and how it all fits together. And then it just goes back and rewrites all of that. So even the difficult, painful things become beautiful in your memory because they had such a deep meaning and purpose for what came after.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the psychological picture of emergence, that the thing that drove all these activities in the first place was a purpose. There was something behind it, but we didn't understand it at all until we get to the purpose fulfilled. And then once the purpose is fulfilled, it goes back and rewrites the past.
Yeah. I think that that's interesting because I think it works. And again, how this scales at different levels. If you think of something like events happen and only then are they able to articulate the past. Like, so 9/11 happened, but 9/11 happening made manifest a lot of things that were happening before it. And I think like the coronavirus, when we look at it in the future, we're going to see the events that are obscure to us that led up to the coronavirus are going to become more apparent in the future. And it's going to be like, oh, you can see the causal chain of events that led us to this huge kind of quilting point in reality. So I think it happens at the individual level, obviously resolution of trauma, like in therapy, right? You can forgive your parents, and that has a shift of kind of your appreciation for their difficulties as being parents, and it literally rewrites your history. So yeah, I think that's an interesting insight that he expresses as well, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's dig into this last chapter, chapter 24 of Hierarchy of Heaven and Earth. I don't know, do you have this version?
Yes, I do. I haven't read that actually, the first chapter I read a while back.
That's okay. We're just going to go through it just a few sentences because
sure.
It's like Jordan Peterson. You can take one sentence, you can talk about it for a couple of hours.
Absolutely. No, I agree. Is that the Angels of Darkness, that chapter?
Yeah, the Angels of Darkness. Yeah. So in the very first paragraph, at the end of the paragraph, he says, when we extrapolate the curve of the infrahuman through the human into the suprahuman regions, and he's going here, it's just a hierarchy, you're going from lower to higher, we find, along with increasing power for good, power for evil. The will is as likely to prove immoral as moral, and knowledge may well be knowledge of how to do more and more harm. Mm-hmm. Everything suggests that as we mount the hierarchy, the moral conflict is exacerbated. I made a couple of notes for myself on that. I mean, the moral conflict is exacerbated partly because our capacity is increased. And so the more capacity we have, the more harm we can accomplish.
Yeah.
And then I also made a note. There is this quote in Maps of Meaning. Actually, it's something that Jordan Peterson is quoting Nietzsche. Knowledge kills action. And so I got to thinking about that. how is it that knowledge kills action? Here in the hierarchy of heaven and earth, he's saying knowledge may well be knowledge of how to do more and more harm. But how is it that knowledge kills action? And it occurs to me that if we think we know all we need to know, we have no reason to move into the unknown, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet the unknown is where we meet up with, you could say, with reality or with God. And one of the other things Jordan Peterson said in his talk with Roger Scruton is, the transcendent is what we meet when we err.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or what we meet when we come to the limits of our knowledge.
Yeah.
So he likens Satan in Paradise Lost with the one who believes he knows everything he needs to know. So he doesn't need to seek anything outside of himself. And that's where we get into a lot of trouble.
Yeah. I think Peterson talks, I think he's quoting Jung, and he says, be weary of unearned wisdom, talking about how you can take a psychedelic, and this psychedelic will illuminate knowledge about yourself that you're not spiritually mature enough to handle. And that could really cause kind of damage in your life. And this idea of accumulating more knowledge at the cost of wisdom, like we have the knowledge of the gods, but we don't have any of the character and the wisdom to wield it. And it makes me think of this idea of, when Satan tempted Adam and Eve in the garden, he didn't lie to them when he said, you'll become like gods, because we ate from the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and we attained the knowledge, right? But with that knowledge didn't come, the way I read it is that if we would have stayed and communed with God like we were commanded to with the one commandment, right, we would have grown and spiritually matured enough to eat from the tree of life, which would have gave us immortality. And then we would have been able to eat from the knowledge of good and evil. Mm-hmm. So, but we ate from the knowledge of good and evil too soon. And now we have the knowledge to build nuclear bombs, but the wisdom to not really understand how to use them. So the more knowledge you, just like you were saying, the more knowledge you accumulate, the more capacity you have to do good and evil, but not knowing the distinction between the two, not being spiritually mature enough to have that the discernment that you need to wield that type of power will ultimately lead to destruction. And I think that you look at the stories of the Tower of Babel, right? It's just building this tower towards the heavens. As again, if the history of humanity is the history of eating from the knowledge of good and evil constantly, right? We keep eating from it and we keep destroying ourselves. The only difference now is we live in a global environment where we're not just going to have the capacity to destroy ourselves at a small scale, whether it's a town or even a country with wars. Now we're at a global capacity to really destroy ourselves. So I think it's something to pay attention to, definitely.
So you mentioned Seraphim Rose earlier. Isn't he the one that wrote the book about nihilism?
Yeah, nihilism. It's a great book.
Yeah, I've read about half of it, and then it disappeared off my computer.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to buy it again. But I was just, very fascinated by it.
Yeah. So the root of kind of nihilism is this: you can't believe in anything anymore, right? Our knowledge has, of kind of like Nietzsche says, God is dead and we've killed him. People that quote him, he's not saying this in a affirming way. He's saying it in a warning, like, hey, you've killed God, right? We've dismantled the metaphysical structures that we sit on, right? His solution is to come up with our own morals and values. In his book, Beyond Good and Evil, his idea is that, humans, we're now going to become like little gods and we're going to construct our own values, but that's not what happens or what's happening, right? We just don't have the spiritual capacity or maturity to do so. So God is dead. And that's what the postmodernist critique is. Metaphysics as such, that any overarching grand narrative has to in itself be wrong, so to speak, right? So we've cut out the roots from under us, and we wonder why we are in a meaning crisis, as John Vervaeke says. All of the things that have supported our ancestors for 2 millennia right? We've cut them off at our own peril, in the hopes and dreams of science being the ultimate explanatory domain of our reality. And that just doesn't seem to be bearing any fruit, right? Science can tell you what is to a certain extent, but it can't tell you what to do. You know, you have data, but that data needs to be interpreted. And if you don't have a place to stand anymore to interpret that data, you're just going to be kind of grasping at straws. And unfortunately, it seems to kind of be where we're at in terms of collectively right now. And we're in that place.
It actually leads right up to the next thing that in the next couple of paragraphs, he says, consider knowledge. Knowing more is wondering less. And wondering less is knowing less. So the minute he's talking about the paradox, that the minute you start trying to increase your knowledge without wisdom, you actually begin to wonder. You begin to lose your sense of awe and wonder. And as you lose your sense of awe and wonder, you actually know less. You don't know more. And then he says this, which I think is so interesting. He wrote this like, I don't know, 70 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
For information without humility or love or astonishment or reverence becomes the worst kind of misinformation. And I mean, that's so relevant to today, right? Information without humility or love or astonishment or reverence becomes the worst kind of misinformation.
Yeah, and I think to use that word literally, like information is in formation. It informs an individual in a society and a collective, right? It literally informs you. So something like disinformation, right? It's just take the word as it's literally explicated. To disinform is to disintegrate the body, right? So we're in that space right now where misinformation, disinformation is status quo at all levels, whether it's the coronavirus, the efficacy of masks, the dangers of vaccines, whether or not the election was X or Y or Z, whether or not the president is a puppet of another nation. All of these things, there's a complete uncertainty in a sense. So yeah, it's amazing. So many parts of this book, it's like he was writing it in the 50s and researching it in the 30s. It's so relevant to today. It's one of those books that there's just nuggets in it, and it would probably take a few read-throughs to really get at them.
He goes on to say, mental extensions are just like their bodily counterparts. They are crippling deformities if they cannot be amputated at a moment's notice. And what that made me think about is like when Jordan Peterson talks about how you have to be willing to let your wrong ideas die so that you can learn more truth. You have to let the lies die. You have to let your less refined thoughts die so that you have room for more refined thoughts, so that you have room for more truth.
Yeah, I think that's the process of spiritual wisdom, right? Is Socrates says, all I know is that I know nothing, right? So if the Zen Buddhists have this idea of beginner's mind, of always coming to things from a place of ignorance, in a sense, not ignorance in a bad sense. But if you're not learning, you're not growing. So if you think you know everything, you're kind of by definition dead or at the end of your growth cycle. Just as a little bit of an aside, I have a 6-year-old and we were out there practicing football and he's like, Dad, how am I doing? As 1 out of 10, how am I doing? I'm like, you're probably at about a 7.5. He's like, why? I want to be at a 10. I'm like, if you're at a 10, it's not fun anymore. I'm like, you don't want to be at a 10. I'm like, you want to, and Peterson talks about, you want to be engaging with things, ideas, practices that are just above your competency level, right? If it's too high, you're not going to be able, you're going to quit. If it's too low, it's boring. So there's this sweet spot of understanding that you have a lot to learn from others. And Peterson says, when I talk with people, I talk to them that like I'm going to learn something. Instead of talking with somebody thinking of this person, whether, they're not educated, whatever it is, whatever judgments you can have, if you can look at it like I can learn from everyone, I think that's where the humility comes in. And it all goes back again to spiritual growth, right? It goes back to understanding that, and he talks about this beautifully in this book, that we are in it together. Like, just like if our cells in our body aren't properly communicating and functioning together, then there is no Karen, right? There is no James. That identity disintegrates, and that scales up to a whole. So we're a nation, or we're, a state or a nation. We need to be functioning and caring for each other, right? And understanding that necessarily people have different capacities. I can't do plumbing, right? We all need each other. We all have specific capacities, and having that humility and that understanding, I think, is important. Because I think that's the problem with scientism, or, science is a wonderful tool, brilliant innovations. Once you think that it's given you the ultimate knowledge, you're necessarily going to start kind of disintegrating as a body. And again, it goes back, information, right, informs the body, this individual or the nation, right? But disinformation disinforms the body. So once you think you kind of know everything, you're done growing. Yeah, lots of interesting things there.
Real science actually lives and dies on that hill. It never pretends to have the whole truth, but they're always seeking for a higher truth and a higher truth and a higher truth. So it is scientism. I mean, you rightly put your finger on it, that it's just this, Jordan Peterson talks about incomplete ideologies that become totalizing, but they're actually crippled ideologies. And scientism is a crippled ideology, but science itself is strictly a method of seeking truth, seeking after truth, and never getting there. Because if they ever got there, then they'd stop, right? There wouldn't be more to learn.
Yeah.
And, there's this quote from Jordan Peterson's new book, in Rule 8, out of his book, Beyond Order. He says, and this is why I think it's so funny for anybody to say that they know enough, that they know everything. What is beyond our memory restricted perceptions is too much. It is the unfathomable totality of the world, past, present, and future, bound up together. Every level connected to every other level, nothing existing in isolation, everything implying something vital but beyond our comprehension, and all of it speaking of the overwhelming mystery of being.
Yeah.
And when you think about how many particles there are in the universe, and really one of the things I think about a lot, because I'm an artist, and the way art works is you don't paint things, you paint relationships. And one of the things about the world, quantum particles, is it's not so much about the particles, it's about the relationships between the particles, because it's the relationships, it's the distances between, and that which is missing, and that, those things that are close together, that's what makes things arise. It's the relationships, it's not the particles themselves, because my particles are undifferentiable from the particles in a cup or in a tree. They're the same set of 14 particles, but the distances between my particles and the relationships among my particles are unique to me. And so I just think this whole idea that you could know enough is just ludicrous.
Yeah, I think that that's a great point. I think to bring it back to, not to bring it back to the Bible, but the way that I kind of see the 10 Commandments now is they're about human relationships, right? It's about encoding. These are the 10 rules. If you boil down culture, if you follow these 10 rules, you can create wonderful bespoke realities. You can travel the stars. You can become an intergalactic, spacefaring civilization if you follow these rules, right? Don't lie to each other. Tell the truth, right? Don't steal from each other. Don't be, this is the big one, the number 10, right? Don't be jealous of others, of others' things. And it seems like, yeah, these are just rules that we tell kids so they can behave. No, these are the basic fundamental codes of relational humanness. And if you get these right, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. All you have to do is get these right. Like, first commandment, right? Don't worship things other than the highest infinite God, the mystery, right? If you plug into the mystery, if you plug into the highest, the infinite, you're going to be able to, you're not going to be plugging and investing your desire in ideologies, right? Ideologies become idolatries. They become, like you said, totalizing systems. And if we invest our desire into them, they will necessarily lead to destruction, right? So science is a wonderful tool, but once you make it an ideology, it's destructive to human relationships. You see now with coronavirus, we've become disincarnated. We've become statistics. We've become data points in a statistical analysis to the point where, my wife's an ICU nurse, and there's people dying and they cannot be with their loved ones at the end of their life. And they've just made a calculation that if we let, family be with their loved ones at the end of their life, there's a X amount chance that coronavirus might spread X amount more. Therefore, it shouldn't be done. It's like, these are human beings. And it's the trauma that is caused by, taking that away from, a lot of times end of life is a healing format for an entire family. I don't know if you've been with someone, we all have, that is dying, and family comes together. And a lot of times, not all the time, it can be a healing event for the entire family. And you are keeping this from people because we're not looked at as people with dignity and as human beings. We're looked at as points within a statistical analysis again. So sorry, I don't mean to take it off to a tangent, but it just frustrates me that it's not clear that that's happening, and that you can't even talk about it because you get categorized in a certain political way. And it's unfortunate. So sorry, I just wanted to kind of add that in there.
Well, no, I totally agree. I mean, what they're doing is they're taking data points that have to do with real people, and then they're using that as the weapon in their war, whatever their war is. There's two sides. There's probably 5 sides in that war, who knows? And everybody wants to make their point, and they're using their model or their data to make their point. But those are real people that they're talking about. I mean, I know this a little bit from personal experience, because the day before Thanksgiving, my husband was I noticed something wrong with his left hand. And he says, oh, it's nothing. It's been that way for a week. Well, my daughter made him go to the doctor. And sure enough, the doctor said, you got to get to the hospital immediately. You had some sort of a brain event. And he got to the hospital. We weren't allowed to see him. He went through brain surgery to remove a subdural hematoma. And he was hospitalized for 3 weeks. Something went wrong in the initial surgery. And so he was in the regular hospital for a week. And then after that, he was in rehab for 2 weeks. And we couldn't see him during all that time. Most of the time, couldn't even talk to him because the hospital staff was so busy, they couldn't get a phone to him, and he wasn't capable of picking up a phone. And those are the times when you're so thankful for the body of Christ, because I was able to reach out to hundreds of our friends and ask them to pray, and have all these people that I knew were on our team praying and holding us up. And everything turned out fine, but he came home, and 10 days after he came home, he was completely back to normal.
Oh, wow.
Although
Thank
when
God.
he first came home, it didn't look good at all, but 10 days of good sleep and good food.
Yeah.
The body
Wow.
has an amazing restorative capacity.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know, I can't really imagine how it must feel for someone whose loved one is dying and they can't be with them. It was enough for me. I mean, well, it was touch and go for a while. We didn't know what was going to happen, but I was so much almost in shock over the whole thing because it happened so fast that I didn't really have time to think about that,
Yeah.
But I'm
Thank
sure that
God.
there are
Yeah.
people who have gone through that, and that they're being held captive to be a participant in somebody else's political war is really shameful.
Yeah. It's almost too shocking for people to consider that that's happening. Like, there's this safety mechanism where they think that can't happen here and that it can't happen now. And it's like, we need to get past that. Because it's absolutely happening. And even if you posit that there's not some overarching, kind of conspiratorial reason that this is happening, you could just say the momentum, this momentum of analyzing data and whatever, it doesn't have to be kind of a malevolent or malicious. I'm not saying that it's not, but doesn't even have to be that to say, hey, well, let's stop now. Like, let's consider it. But the ability to communicate openly about what's happening and to share your opinion, your frustrations is being censored left and right at all levels, not just by the social media companies, but it's hard to have conversations with family members who have taken the red pill or the blue pill and would say that, unless you are wearing a mask right now, you are a bad person, right? Family members, I've seen neighbors, family members disintegrate. My own family, has really, we haven't seen each other and been with each other for a year, my more extended family. And these have repercussions to the social fabric of a country, right? And so it's not just the social media. There's this self-censorship that this is propagating through our society, that I'm really thinking of how to thread. It's really it's really important to really consider how to speak with nuance and have discussions. So I think it's time for leaders to emerge, right? And I don't think it's going to come from the political and the corporate structures. Leaders will emerge from who knows where, but we need people to speak up in a way with care and love, right? From the heart, right? But also, understanding and can speak the kind of scientific language where you can just ask questions that, get people thinking and let them come up with their own realizations rather than kind of beating them over the head with what you think. That's kind of what I've been trying to do, and failing a lot, but I'm trying to do it as best as I can,
Well, I think that is the core of it, the inability to communicate honestly about what we're seeing and the questions that we actually have. Not that we know what's happening, and it doesn't have to be a conspiracy. All it has to be is that this is one more evidence of this inability to communicate anymore, that that is coming out of it's not so much a conspiracy, but there is a way of thinking which I think you could attribute to, Jordan Peterson would attribute to the postmodern move, but you know more about postmodernism than I do. And you have a probably more positive vision of postmodernism than Jordan Peterson does. But it seems like it's that political correctness move, or well, I'll let you talk to that.
Yeah.
What is that?
Postmodernism is a large kind of broad stroke talking about political, social, philosophical theory that started in the early 20th century with people like Theodor Adorno, the critical theory school, right? And I think the roots of it were to identify corruption that has infiltrated all institutions, which I think is a noble thing, right? Corruption infiltrated the church. Corruption infiltrated the government. At all levels, there was this corrupting force, and it's about exploring the nature of power and power relations between humans and institutions, and identifying and critiquing, right? And this is the role of the left, and Peterson said this: the left observes the hierarchy and says there's corruption there and points it out, right? And that with the idea of fixing it, right? Of rooting out the corruption and rebuilding the system in a sense, or fixing the system. But this whole thing has run amok where it's nothing but critique on a critique on a critique. And it's this kind of self-defeating, kind of cancerous self-eating process where it's like, okay, we've critiqued enough. There are problems, there are issues, right? We need to have kind of this second part of it, which is why I think both sides of the political spectrum are necessary, right? You need the left to point to corruption, and you need the right to help rebuild another hierarchy, a new hierarchy, or revivify the hierarchy in a sense. So these two poles are important. And the critical theory types and the postmodern types were saying that, hey, modernity and our institutions, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So here are the different areas where corruption has set in. Wonderful. But that has gone to, hierarchies are bad as such. And it's like, what? And Peterson kind of played a big role in having, I think there's a lot of people that I know that really think that hierarchies have to go. And it's like, wait, what do you mean by that? And I don't think they know what they mean. Like, because like Peterson says, do you have a favorite song? Do you have a favorite movie? Right? Just to get up and exist in the world, there are hierarchies. You have a value system where you appreciate some things more than others, right? But that doesn't mean you denigrate the other things you don't appreciate. It doesn't mean you destroy them. You appreciate them as well, right? But hierarchies in themselves are not bad. They are just the way reality works. And the postmodernism has led to this critical race theory, which is a total bastardization of any of the good kind of redeeming qualities that, critical theory had in its inception, I think. It's just,
well, if postmodernism is based on this idea of critiquing the system and seeing where the corruption is in the system, it seems to me that that would be the first danger signal, because the minute you start critiquing the system, then you don't have to look at yourself anymore, and you can feel all puffed up about your ability to see the corruption over there and not look at the corruption in here.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the in here part, right? I think they would say that it gets kind of correlated with religious kind of conceptions, which were an anathema to the postmodern conception, right? Any type of religion or even the transcendent as such, they abhorred. Mostly the French postmodernists, the structuralists, post-structuralists, they were really heavily materialistic, with Marx's dialectical materialism, that the forces of material reality are what determine our existence on the earth, right? And we just need to keep looking at the material conditions, and through that we can ascertain kind of how to build our society and our world. But I think it's you can't get rid of the transcendent. You cannot get rid of 50% of reality. Like, go back to the hierarchy of heaven and earth. You cannot get rid of heaven. It doesn't go away. You can think that you have, but it comes back in abhorrent and really malicious ways. I think that's the history of the 20th century, with obviously what Peterson studied, right? Nazi Germany, the USSR, all of these ideas, they were let's get rid of the old, let's get rid of the old aristocracy, right? And then we'll be able to distribute resources appropriately, and we're going to have a utopia, right? No, because the people, like you said, that are now taking over, that line between good and evil rests in the center of their heart. And if they think that there's no such thing as this line between good and evil, or there's no such thing as evil, they're completely captured by it. And history shows us that.
See that. You said, though, that they can clearly see that there's evil in the system, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you think if it's a fractal,
they don't think that evil exists in the individual. Do they connect up this idea of an evil potential inside an individual as being strictly a religious viewpoint?
Yeah, I think they wouldn't even use the term evil. They would consider it as kind of good and bad in a sense. But just to bring it a little bit back to the book, right? So fractal, it scales up at fractal levels. So if you're pointing to a corruption in the hierarchy, you're necessarily pointing to the same corruption in yourself. And I think that's what was missed and was being missed. And I think that has to do with their hesitancy to consider anything that might be correlated to the transcendent, to heaven, to good and evil, to these old, superstitious traditions that old people used to believe. Now it's this raising up science to its highest level. Like science can't tell you, it's the is-ought distinction. It can tell you what is, that you can observe the data, but it can't tell you what to do with that data that necessarily, involves interpretation, which comes from a vantage point, and it comes from an ideological perspective most of the time. And I think that's, it's tremendous that such smart people, collections of, this is the warning, right? Collection of very smart people can go very, very wrong very quickly.
Well, so I'm sorry to keep pursuing this, but I'm trying to understand. Does that mean that if they begin to see something bad in themselves, if they got a glimpse of something bad in themselves, they would just ride right over that and pretend that it's not there? Because if they did, then that would imply some sort of religious impulse.
Well, yeah. Well, they would say that the reason that there's bad in human beings is because the system, they use the term, interpolates human beings. So human beings are part of a system. So the corruption in the system infects the different parts of the system, the different individuals. So the corruption that I'm looking at in the system, if we tear down the system and rebuild the system, right? I think that's kind of their perspective in a sense, right? Yes, human beings, yeah. But and Peterson really, I think, brought it back to the individual. And I think they're both right, and again, going back to this fractal level of reality, the evil does exist in the system and in the human being individual, right? It's hard to distinguish or to make the distinction is that it's in the system or in the human being. I think it goes back to the individual versus collective, kind of paradox. It's a both and thing. And I think, and the way I kind of tend to is you need to work on yourself, right? If you work on yourself, then you're going to start affecting the system in a positive way, right? But if you have, if you've worked on yourself, but you have a majority of people that aren't doing that, then the momentum of the good that you're trying to do will be kind of outweighed by the evil that's still perpetuating itself. So it's not as simple as just working on yourself, but I think that's the fundamental unit of change. But how do you scale that up? Mm-hmm. And that's what it takes, a metaphysical system or some kind of structure we all identify with, right? In order for us to collectively become better as human beings. But if we're all siloed in our own individual ideologies, we don't have a shared collective narrative, then we can't make a shared collective push to become better. So it's disintegrating as such, in a sense. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's complicated. It's complicated.
Yeah. Well, you laid it out very clearly. Actually, this actually leads right up to the next little section here. All these disquieting consequences of hierarchical ascent are scarcely surprising if the hierarchy is a social structure. For we have reason enough to fear that the organization of communities beyond a certain degree of centralized complexity means the disorganization of the values they enshrine. This is at the bottom of page 249. Mm-hmm. And we have little reason for believing that social life at the more exalted hierarchical levels is particularly peaceful. If the odium theologicum and the persistent tradition of sidereal and angelic warfare are any guide, then it is perhaps even less harmonious than at the human level.
That speaks right to it, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the middle of that page, he goes on to say, the news page of my paper is more grown up than the sports page, but it does a great deal more harm on that account. It ensures that I shall be frightened and resentful on the largest possible scale every breakfast time. Yeah. Now, for the young people watching, a newspaper is a thing that we used to get that had the news in it every day.
And it used to be relatively a lot less frightening than our news today, right? Because everybody got the copy of the New York Times. Everybody watched the 3 channels, right? So even though it was, propagating fear, not to this kind of insanity that we're seeing now, where people just live in a different world, whether they watch CNN or Fox News, or they're just watching YouTube. So it's like, we don't even have a shared collective reality to be afraid of. We're afraid of our own realities.
Well, because they're purposely pushing us into silos. I mean, they get a lot of benefit out of creating 2 warring contingents. It reminds me of 1984, where these two continents were against this one, and then later on it's A and B are against C, and later on it's C and B are against A. But whatever it is, you're supposed to know who the enemy is, and then everybody just is angry with the enemy all the time.
Yeah.
They have a vested interest in keeping us in that place.
It's the weaponization of the scapegoat mechanism. Girard's scapegoat mechanism that eventually, the sins of the civilization can be put on the scapegoat and can be discharged by the sacrifice of the scapegoat, and that returns order to the civilization. It may be for, it's temporary, but if you find a scapegoat that you can collectively, discharge all of the sin of the civilization, it does restore a sense of order. But I think that Christ short-circuited that process. So the scapegoat is innocent. So we're not going to be able to discharge, the sins of the people on a scapegoat, but that mechanism's still there, right? And it's being leveraged. And, whether Donald Trump was a huge scapegoat, whether you whether whether he had the bad quality.
There actually is a good, valuable scapegoat.
Yeah, but whether or not the accusations are warranted or not, I think is less important than that mechanism in itself, right? Because you can make, witch burning was a scapegoat kind of situation. And you see in America now, they're using the scapegoat mechanism. Now that Trump's gone, they're moving and orienting this scapegoat mechanism on individuals, let's say, that stormed the Capitol on the 6th, like these people who I don't, I might not agree with them politically, but they're in solitary confinement and they're being held for misdemeanor charges, right? And it's like, that's not right. Like, but they are part of the other. They've been othered, and it's okay for that to happen to human beings because they're part of the other group that is bad, is white supremacist, is whatever you want to call it. And it's frightening that so many good, well-meaning people are like, oh, good, it good, serves them right. And it's bizarre. And it's not bizarre if you know history at all, that this is just the way that, Peterson talks about that, the state of nature or history. Like if we break down the walls, if we tear down, the Chesterton's white walls, right, we got to be careful what's on the other side. And the assumption is that on the other side is utopia, when the base reality of human beings is war and chaos. So it's like the system, it's a meticulous process to build a system that distributes well-being like we have now. And because of whatever the forces that are at play now, we're looking to destroy the system, thinking that underneath it will be some kind of utopia, when the exact opposite is true if you look at history. So it's really precarious, because again, people that are captured by this idea, they're captured by it. Like there's no reasoning. And I think that's what part of the 10 Commandments is: don't build idols, right? Because you completely buy into the logic, and you completely act irrationally, and you're unaware of it. Like the Germany was the avant-garde of science, technology, culture in the 30s, right? In terms of the smartest people, well-meaning people, whatever it is. And that highest level of cultural sophistication led to, extermination camps and to Nazi Germany. So it's like, do you think that can't happen? And Peterson talks about, if you were in Nazi Germany, would you be a Nazi? And I ask people this, oh, no, not me. Really? You really think that? Yeah, I wouldn't do it. I would do it. Well, I would think the opposite, just to be mindful of it happening now. And I think unfortunately, that's kind of where we're at, as these same forces are capturing people, and myself included, right? I mean, we're all, to some extent, hopefully we are aware of it and can be humble and say that we don't know what's happening. This idea of being certain, either one way or the other, I think is a manifestation of the uncertainty of the coronavirus for so long just weighs on people that they'll invest their hopes and desires on anything. So they'll grab onto authority, no matter how absurd the rules are sounding, and they'll grab onto conspiracy theories, no matter how absurd they sound, because they'd rather have absurd certainty than kind of ambiguous uncertainty. And I try to, the best as I can, rest in that uncertainty and just say, I don't know, So I think it all wraps back to kind of what you were saying earlier.
Well, I hesitate to say this because I'm not trying to be prophetic or anything, but I think the time is certainly going to come when, if this dynamic shows up in our culture, in our civilization, where one team goes after the other team with hatchets or whatever comes to hand, there are those of us who are going to have to say, I'm not going to participate. And we may be the first to go, because the whole drive is there to get us worked up to the point that we will participate, that we will go out and get. I don't know if you heard Jordan Peterson's recent talk with Paul Rossi.
Yes, I watched the whole thing. Yes.
Yeah. And when Paul was talking about his experience in his earlier years of being almost like an Antifa person. He felt so justified in his anger and his willingness to go out and throw bombs and stuff like that, because he felt like the system is so corrupt. So if I'm against that, then I'm a good person no matter what I do. So it justifies anything that I might do. And we have a whole lot of people in that situation right now that feel justified in their anger, and there's going to be a lot of people caught in the crossfire. You know, have you
Yeah.
heard about braver angels?
What's that?
Braver angels.
I don't think so.
Oh, well, you want to get involved with braver angels. At least get them on your radar. The one of the founders is a guy by the name of John Wood. And Braver Angels is trying to put forth a platform for disagreement, for people from opposing views to be able to talk to each other with civility and good cheer. And so they have debates a couple times a week online. Lots of thousands and thousands and thousands of people are following them now. And they just have just normal people from both sides come on and talk about their points of view about very contentious issues, and in a way that provides the information on both sides for people to take a look at. So I really like what they're doing. And I also like, are you familiar with Chloe Valdary? Chloe Valdary is a young woman. Amazing that she's so young and she's been able to do so much. She has started a theory that she calls enchant theory, the theory of enchantment. Well, you don't do Twitter, but I'm not sure if she has a YouTube channel or not. But the theory of enchantment is her take on how to orient people towards a loving version of truth. And she's a strong advocate of Martin Luther King, and she's also very interested in James Baldwin, a lot of these thinkers, and she's kind of woven this together into a training program that she's actually getting quite a few corporations to buy her program instead of buying critical race theory programs, because her program is trying to get at the same problem. How do you get people out of a racist perspective, but without creating another racist perspective while you're doing it, right? And she's a brilliant young woman, just absolutely brilliant. And she's getting quite a following. So
yeah, I'll have to check that out. Thank you for bringing me my awareness to it. Is the Braver Angels, is that on YouTube, or is it a kind of separate platform?
I think they are on YouTube. But if you just look up John Wood or Braver Angels on YouTube, a bunch of stuff will show up, because I think Brett Weinstein has talked to both of those people.
Okay.
Brett has talked to John Wood. I know Paul Vanderklay talked to John Wood several years back, which is how he got on my radar. And Chloe Valdary, I found out I heard Chloe Valdary the first time when she was on Dave Rubin's podcast 2-3 years ago. And so I invited her to come on the Meaning Code last year, and she came on. We had a great conversation, but then, and I would have had her on for another one, but after that, her status rocket took off. So she didn't have time anymore.
I have to check her out. I've probably seen her. I just, the name doesn't ring a bell. I'll definitely check them out. I like the people that are coming, at least attempting to come up with solutions. You know, that's important, obviously, right?
Yeah. Otherwise we lose hope, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about your background with Greek. Do you know the Greek language because your grandparents were Greek?
Yeah, it's the first language I learned because I grew up with my grandparents. My mom and dad worked at, they had restaurants, Greek restaurants, go figure. But yeah, I was raised by them really early on. So yeah, I learned Greek first. So, I'm, fluent, but, not in terms of writing really in any kind of meaningful way.
Does that change the way that you read the New Testament?
Well, I just started actually. I think it's called an interlinear Bible that has the Hebrew, the English, and the Greek. And yeah, there are, I think, pretty significant differences. I mean, even, going from the conception of in the beginning was the Word, right? right? In Greek, it's thinarchi tanto logos, right? And it's, if you hear it in English, in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. It's like, what do you mean? The word was God's a word, or what, God is language? But when you think of it in terms of logos, it's like, oh, it makes a lot more sense in terms of, in the beginning was the logos, the fundamental organizing principle of reality, and and God is the ultimate fundamental pattern, but not just that. That's a way you can conceptualize it, right? Because the word pattern, the root word is patera in Greek, which means father, right? So logos being this, this structuring pattern made of love in some kind of strange way, it makes that whole, it makes reading the scripture more interesting. And there's many examples of that I'm just exploring now. I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, I quite often will, if I'm struggling with a verse, I quite often will go back to the interlinear and look at the Greek. But I mean, I don't know Greek, so I can only go by what they say that a particular Greek word means. But I can't remember who I was reading or listening to the other day, and they were talking about how Greek as a language just is a much fuller, richer kind of a language than Latin. And so when they made the decision to put a lot of the New Testament into Latin, they lost a lot of that depth and riches. And one of the verses that I've been looking at a lot is faith is the substance of things hoped for. And just thinking about that relationship between faith and hope and what they actually are. And I actually wrote this down someplace. I have notes everywhere. Probably won't be able to find it, but hope is the vision or the tangible potential, and faith is acted out. So hope that is acted upon with faith becomes reality.
Yeah, that term faith. Yeah.
Yeah. So if faith is the substance of things hoped for, the hoping for is what kind of puts the picture out in front of us. It's the aim, right?
Yeah.
And the faith is the action that produces that, or that allows that to become a substance, to become reality. And you don't get that if you just read the verse.
Yeah.
Faith is the evidence of things hoped for. Well, what does that really mean? You don't think about it, but once you look at the Greek words, you realize, oh, there's a whole boatload of meaning underneath every one of those words.
Yeah. Yeah, really. Yeah, that definitely. I think the word faith is something that really needs to be looked at again with new eyes, right? Faith is this idea, oh, you believe in stuff without evidence. Oh, no, not exactly. It goes back to Peterson's, do you believe in God, Jordan? No, he says, I act as if God exists, right? And I kind of thought that was a cop out for a while. And then now I'm like, whoa, that's actually more powerful than belief, right? Because how you act in the world tells people kind of what you believe in the first place, but then it actually builds what you believe in, right? So it's this idea, and Marshall McLuhan says that faith is a mode of perception, right? So it's a way of seeing that it's something that you can cultivate within yourself, purify your heart, and you can perceive through faith the kingdom that's at hand, right? But it's something that you have to work at. It's something that you have to, challenge yourself and do. And I like that, faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's like, we are creators of our reality, right? We project our world. He talks, Harding talks about projection, right? We project into our world our understanding of things. So like you were talking about how hope is so important in times like these. Well, having genuine hope will build the future in a sense. It will incarnate the kingdom that's here for us to incarnate. That's a very interesting topic that I've seen a lot of people looking at in different ways. I think John Vervaeke and what's his name? I had him on my podcast. His name escaped me now. They're really looking at things like faith in new ways, which are really old ways. It's really kind of rescuing these kind of fundamental ways the world is, and kind of getting rid of this stale language that has just run its course. But yeah, I love it. There's so much beauty in the scriptures, and you can spend the rest of kind of your lifetime exploring and cultivating this faith that I think is absolutely necessary. What's that passage from? Do you know by chance?
Faith is the substance of things hoped for.
Yeah, what passage?
Hebrews 11, verse 1, I believe. I did an in-depth study of Hebrews a couple of years ago with a precept group, and I decided by the end of that if I only had one book and I was on a deserted island, if I could only have one book of the Bible and I was on a deserted island someplace, it would be Hebrews, because it's so rich and deep and has everything that you need. And really, it has all of the Old Testament and the New Testament kind of collapsed into that one book.
Okay. Wow. I'm gonna have to revisit it.
Yeah, really, really rich. And it lays out exactly who Christ is, his character, his reality, his place throughout all of the Old Testament. And yeah, it's all there. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
And you would, I think, if you can read it in your interlinear, it would be so rich for you coming at it from the Greek perspective, because there's a lot of places that this meta prefix is used when talking about Christ. And there's a lot of depth and riches in that word, in that prefix of what meta is. It's not only, it's in the most of the translations of it, it comes out as being, like metaphysics or, meta. But in some ways, I think that meta has more of what the kids use it for nowadays when they say something is meta. I mean, it's really other, it's above and beyond. It's coming up to another level, going up above the upper level, so that you can come back and look down on everything and get this really big picture of everything, right? So, and it's also the idea of the change that takes place after the union. So it's the withness of the after, which is it's a strange way to think, but yeah. So anyway, there's a lot of good stuff in the book of Hebrews. So
yeah, so like the word metanoia, right? Metanoia means so noia, nous is this heart mind, right? It's the heart, it's the mind that's in the center of the heart, or the nous, just kind of your spiritual eye. And to have an experience of metanoia is to change your heart, right? And in doing so, it reorients the past, like we were talking about earlier, like having a change of heart or a changed perspective, up leveling your perspective puts things into place that before were disjointed, and kind of heals. So that's very very, very interesting.
Translated repent sometimes.
Yeah,
yeah,
which I think it has these connotations of guilt, right, and blame, which it's nothing of the sort. To have a metanoia is to have a change of heart. It's healing. It's reorienting your perspective. It's growth. It's spiritual growth. It's getting closer to what Adam and Eve were working towards before they ate from the fruit too early. Right. We need to get to theirs, looks like as quick as possible now. But, the good thing is that it's happening. There are these, profound changes that are happening within people and within collectives and within communities, but they're not going to show up on our television screens or kind of the general channels of information coming in. The more negativity, the more fear that they're propagating through our screens, I think it shows how they're losing the battle, right? Because, there's pockets of areas and things are getting a lot better for people spiritually, right? So they're just throwing kind of the kitchen sink at the world to keep people in fear. But it's like, well, there's hope in that conversations like these and finding like-minded, like-hearted people that in the world, and you're kind of we're building networks and nodes and networks that is, configuring the kingdom in a sense, right? That is building the new. And when the new is being built, the old has to crumble. And as it's crumbling, you can either pay attention to the falling pieces that are being destroyed, or you can pay attention to the light that's shining through, that's causing the disintegration of the old, right? So it's about choosing to look at the light that is there rather than the falling infrastructure. So if nothing else, it's interesting times to be here and now.
Well, I'm so glad that you have a channel, and if you can send me a link to your channel, I can put it in the notes here.
Yeah,
and
we'll do.
I'll also send you a copy of our conversation so that you can post it on your channel if you want to. And
Yep.
I recommend that you give it a try to get hold of John Wood and see if
Mm-hmm.
he'll come on your channel and talk about braver angels.
Yeah, I'm going to definitely look it up.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate it.
I think the two of you could have a really rich conversation. He, like you, is very knowledgeable about philosophy and political history. He actually was in politics before he got involved with Braver Angels.
Oh, wow. Very
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, I'm going to look him up for sure.
He
Definitely.
ran for Congress, I think. That's how he got on my radar, like 4 years ago. I think he ran for Congress, and
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
but out of that experience, he decided to do this, which I think is a much better use of his time and energy.
Yeah, I don't think the solutions are going to come from what we look at as politics now, or the corporate world, or the media world. Like the leaders again are emerging in a new emerging space. So I'm going to look them up. Very cool. I appreciate and this is an expression of what we were talking about before. Through communication, new things are revealed to you, and you can go through, and develop more rich networks of people that are trying to make things better. So I appreciate that.
I'm going to just read one last thing in here so we can kind of wrap up the chapter on a note of hope.
Mm-hmm.
Because I thought this was so cool, and it also relates to art. God himself, more than any creature, subjects himself to the rule that it is not enough to find oneself in others. The others must be free and in no way coerced, must be independent centers and not radii extending from one's own center. God is the guarantor of our distinctness from himself and from one another. Each of us is eternally unique and inviolable, for he needs every member of his hierarchy of heaven and earth to be itself and no other. Here he says something a little maybe controversial.
What page is that? What page?
This is on page 257 in the middle.
Okay.
Evil is the price of this freedom. Creatures incapable of sin, sustained in every perfection, would be mere projections of himself, and his love for them would be the self-love which is the essence of evil. Of necessity, love individuates its object. So far from the crowning level of the hierarchy threatening the independence of the others, it stands guard over it as a thing most precious.
Wow.
And that really struck me, because one of the things we talk about when we're in art, when we're painting, is you don't want to let any part of the painting become so precious that you can't let it become a part of the whole painting. It has to become a part of the whole painting. And sometimes in order to do that, you might have to mar it or block it out or push it back in order to bring out the harmony of the whole painting.
Mm-hmm.
But that which is precious, that which is most precious, is that which might have to be sacrificed. And of course, in the case of Christ, that's exactly what happened. The most precious had to be sacrificed so that all of us who are precious to God could be individuated, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, the sacrifice of Christ, the self-sacrifice, there's so much there that can inform how to be with each other. You know, so many concepts like, you know, a woman should submit to her husband, right? It's like, that sounds so crazy. What do you mean a woman should submit to her husband? No, there's a reciprocal relationship there that you're missing. The other half is that the husband is to sacrifice for his wife and his family, right? Really sacrifices who he is, his identity, right? And that sacrifice through love informs the family, right? If you work for a company, there's a CEO, and a lot of companies, their CEOs are jerks, self-absorbed. The company doesn't, you know, run well in a sense. But if you can take this idea of self-sacrifice and apply it to corporations, you would have corporations that ran, you know, with the whole in mind, right? If you had a CEO that really sacrificed and cared for the hierarchy, the bottom of the hierarchy, you know, that little kind of piece right there and speaks to the whole understanding and the reciprocal notion of the head of the hierarchy is there to sacrifice, inform, and provide meaning for the body. And the body is there to support, care for, right? And when those two things are operating and working together, you have, you know, the kingdom in a sense, you have well-being. But if something goes wrong, which it inevitably does, and it has, then you have kind of the opposite. So yeah, there's so much there.
It's
You know,
really funny that you brought that up, because years ago, I used to be an intercultural consultant, and one of the companies that I worked with was Procter and Gamble. And
mhm,
Procter and Gamble had a very definite culture, and their culture was that a, a boss, a superior, his role was to prepare his subordinate to take his place
mhm,
when he moved up.
yep,
And his role was, as a subordinate of his superior, was to do everything he could to help his superior move up.
mhm,
And so he was to support from under, and then he was to reach down and pull up from under him.
yeah,
So it was this picture of, I'm going to help you up into my place, and then I'm going to move up into the next place. And he's helping me up into his place while I'm pushing him up into his, you know. So
yeah,
it's this whole structure of moving each other up, which, I mean, on one side, it does sound self-serving. I'm doing this because it's going to open
mhm,
up a place for me. If I push him up faster, it'll open up a place for me.
yeah,
But it
yeah,
is also this picture of supporting from under and then reaching down and helping up.
yeah,
And you brought up the whole thing about women submitting to their husband, and I'm sure this is going to create a cacophony in the comment section. But this idea, I think the idea of submit is often misunderstood, because the submit is to come under the shelter of, right? To
mhm,
come under. And understood properly, my husband sacrifices for me, and I come under his shelter because I'm protected within the umbrella of his shelter. And
yeah,
I'm thankful for that, very thankful
yeah.
for that. Now, I don't always submit as well as I should.
I think that
And
word, I
it's a
think that
learning
word
experience.
is problematic. The word submit, obviously, with the cultural baggage that it has. I wonder what that word,
Back
like
up
the,
one verse,
yeah,
there's
yeah,
just before that verse, it says, husbands and wives, submit yourselves to one another,
hmm, yeah,
right?
it's
So you
reciprocal.
submit yourselves to one another. It's a reciprocal thing.
Yeah,
But then when you look at the relational issue, you can't ever have an equal partnership. In business, if you have an equal partnership 50-50, it'll never go anywhere, because
hmm,
somebody has to have the final decision-making capacity.
yeah,
And how do we know if God has not given men a particular strength in decision-making, because he is going to be the one, and not only that, but also a particular responsibility in decision making. Making decisions is a big responsibility, and if you're going to take it seriously, you're going to be very careful what kind of decisions you make, because you're going to be held accountable for the decisions you make.
yeah.
And
And the thing you care most about is the thing you're making the decision for. Like, you know, it's not yourself. You're caring for the thing. And I think it's maybe the masculine. You know, the masculine is the qualities of setting boundaries, right? And the feminine is, right. So you can have a woman, right, that I think embodies masculine qualities like this. In a sense, I don't think that's. I think as a general, masculine and the feminine is distributed through men and women. But I think there are women that can embody the masculine wonderfully, that could be leaders and the heads of corporations or whatever it be, better than a lot of men, right? So it's not, I don't think it's directly divided, right, between men and women. There is obviously something, a lot to that, but it's like the feminine is the body, the church, the mother of God is the body of Christ, right? The head is your head, right? It informs your body. It provides it with meaning, and the body is there to support your head, right? If the body just wants to do what it does on its own, then the identity of Karen won't be coherent. It won't exist. And so this reciprocal relationship that allows for identities to manifest. And once we start kind of messing with those, things get squirrely. So they're not simple things to talk about, though.
It's complicated, right?
Yeah, it's complicated. Yeah, I think we can leave it at that. I think that's the best place to leave it.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
I think I'll make that the title.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
It's been great talking to you, James. I hope we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, I do too. Likewise, I appreciate it very much.
Okay.
Thanks for your time.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.